Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced another unilateral ceasefire, this time from the midnight on 7 May of the local time to midnight on the 10th of May, also on the local time. That will cover both the daytime of the 8th and the 9th of May. From the Russian perspective, this is because of the celebration for the end of World War II, which will be celebrated in parts of Europe and in Ukraine on the 8th of May and in Russia on the 9th of May, which their famous celebration of the end of the Great Patriotic War. This is going to be the 80th anniversary of that. It's a big blowout that Russia has planned, and they've got dignitaries and heads of state coming in from all over the world, and they're trying to make sure that that stays safe for them, and they're offering to also make it safe for the Ukraine side, et cetera, by saying, hey, for this period of time, we're going to have all this combat operations stop, all of them. It's a complete cessation of hostilities during that period of time. Russian media is adding that Putin also says that the purpose of this is that they do want peace. They want to have peace talks without preconditions, but very clear here, aimed at eliminating the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis, constructive interaction with international partners. So they say, yeah, by the way, this is for the specific issue of the Victory Day celebrations, but we do want to end the war through negotiations, and we do want it to address the root causes. Now, that is really, really important, because so far, almost the only thing on the entire Western side of this calculation is not even thinking about the root causes. They're just thinking about getting the the war stopped and the killing stopped, as Trump says. Yesterday on the tarmac, heading for one of his trips, President Trump addressed what he's thinking about.
We want him to stop shooting, sit down and sign a deal. And we have the confines of a deal, I believe. And I want him to sign it and be done with it and just go back to life.
What punitive action are you considering taking against Russia?
Well, I have a lot of things I can do. I'm not looking to do it, but I have a lot of strength.
Now, that's he's addressing there an issue that many on the left and even some on the right and nearly everybody of an elite status in Europe is saying, hey, you're not putting enough pressure on Russia. All you're doing is putting all the pressure on Zelensky, the victim of all this, is how they're characterizing this. They're saying, why do you only push the little guy and do nothing to push the big guy here? Implying that all you have to do is to put pressure on him. Like there is an alternative or a reaction can come. As a matter of fact, some are characterizing this ceasefire by Putin as being evidence that Trump just turned to just a rhetorical statement against him a couple of days ago of saying, stop, Vladimir, don't shoot missiles into Russia, into Ukraine. I want the killing to stop, et cetera. And they say, oh, see, it had a little bit of an effort there because now he's done this 2-day ceasefire, but they're saying that's not enough. One of the, I guess, a good representative of this is Evil Dalder, who over the weekend says that he thinks that Trump should put more pressure on Putin.
President Putin doesn't want peace. He wants to control Ukraine. That's why he started this war back in 2014 when he took Crimea and started an uprising that he directly supported in eastern Ukraine. And of course, what he's wanted since the full-scale invasion in February of 2022. He wants to control Ukraine, and in fact, he wants to change the European post-Cold War security order. And as long as he's not stopped from doing that, he will continue to push. So I think what the president said, the time may be to recognize that Vladimir Putin doesn't want peace and that we need to put more pressure on him. That time, I hope, has now finally come.
Okay, there's a lot wrong with that. Let's start off at the beginning of that, which he says that, again, this whole thing that the attack was unprovoked and that Putin's intent is to capture all of Ukraine and that he wants to reorder the whole architecture of security inside Europe. To the contrary, and then he also added in there toward the end that he said that Putin is the one that started this by instigating people on his side of the civil war that was going on there to rise up, and then he used that as a pretext to come in. If you look at what actually happened, however, you'll have a different understanding of things, because the Russians have been trying to get the Minsk Accords settled and applied since 2015, all the way through. In fact, up until the war broke out, they never had any comments to the contrary. You have the OSCE, not Russian propaganda, but the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, who themselves recorded a significant uptick in attacks from the Ukraine military into the eastern part of the Donbass area prior to Russia's entering the war. So, and now I'm not going to say that the Russian side is innocent in anything. It's not, they're certainly not the victims, but the claim on the Western side that basically we did nothing. Nobody did anything on our side. We're just sitting there and damn, one day, all of a sudden, here comes a bunch of tanks. That's how it's being characterized. And that is a gross mischaracterization of what actually happened. And until you come to a point to where you understand what actually happened and what were the root causes of the war, then you're not even going to get to a possibility of ending it on anything that's relatively I don't guess there really is a good side to happen for the Ukraine side anymore. That day has passed. We lost that one. We gave it away, actually. But you see the big problem. Even Trump in his statement there a second ago was saying, I just want the killing to stop. I just want to stop the whole thing and then get back onto normal life. So he just wants it to go away. He's not talking about addressing the root causes because that gets a lot more complicated. And then you see from like Ivo Daalder, he's also saying we don't want to even look at the root causes unless we're only looking at the Russian root causes and ignoring everything that happened here. How do you have room for having a negotiated settlement that settles anything if you don't even acknowledge what the conditions are that the two sides are arguing over? I mean, first of all, you have to get some kind of unified position, or at least in the ballpark, maybe even just in the parking lot, of understanding so that both sides understand what's going on and what they're trying to negotiate. Because right now you have the Russian side trying to negotiate their view of what happened and all the root causes of it. And then you have the Western side writ large trying to say, we're trying to end the war on terms beneficial to us, ignoring everything that happened and only blaming all of it on the Russian side. So you have the Russians saying, here are the root causes. You have the Western side saying, here are the root causes. And no one's looking in the middle, in the whole area here, where there's like one set of at least general views and general set of facts that existed that everybody can look, because there's fault you can find fault from both parties. But the truth is, and if we have to be honest with ourselves, the majority of the fault and the setup for this, and I know it's just like fingernails on a chalkboard to hear for many of my Western friends, most of them lie on our side. We could have avoided this war so many different ways. And we ignored all the things to the Russian side because we didn't care about the Russian side. We didn't care about their view. We ignored them really from, I mean, you can go all the way back to 1994, all the way through, but especially from 2007 and then 2008, when direct statements were made by Putin that we consider an existential threat, you moving NATO closer to our border. And then all the things that happened when the 2008 declaration for NATO that Ukraine and Georgia will eventually be brought into NATO, all the things all the way through. And then, of course, the non-compliance with the Minsk Accords. They didn't change their the Ukraine constitution, which was almost a core requirement of the Minsk from the Ukraine side. They never changed that, which was supposed to give limited autonomy to the Ukrainian people. Important to recognize that the Ukrainian people in the eastern part of the country, and allow them to have use their own language in their discourse along with Ukrainian. They weren't even saying get rid of the Ukraine stuff, just let there be also their historic language, their ethnic language of Russian. So it was not that unreasonable what was being asked by the Russian side for the people of Ukraine in Ukraine at the time. But of course, then we didn't want to listen to that, so we didn't apply that, and then all the things happened from that point forward. Now, if you're going to find out where this can go here, this is important here. It's not just an academic thing to find out what does each side consider the root causes, because that's what each side considers the root causes is what's informing their actions right now. And when you see those convergence of those two actions, if they're disconnected from a general understanding of what actually happened, you don't have a lot of optimism about what's going to happen in the future. And given the balance of power between the two sides, it ain't looking good for the Ukraine side if we don't change our understanding of what is reality here. I'm going to give you one example here on the U.S. side. This is Representative Adam Smith, who, first of all, was asked what he thinks about Putin's ceasefire option here for this 2-day period. And then he goes a little further.
this point, there's no reason to believe it. As your reporter just pointed out, the same thing was said over the Easter period, and there was no effort whatsoever by Russia to adhere to it. So it's likely just a PR campaign, but we'll see. We'll see whether or not he holds to that. But the real big message here is it seems like President Trump is finally realizing what everybody else in the world knew for years, and that is that Putin is going to push this war as hard as he can unless you stop him. And it has really hurt the process to get to peace that President Trump has put all the pressure on Zelensky. He sent a very clear message to President Putin from the start of Trump's administration that if Putin just holds out, eventually President Trump will abandon Ukraine. And that incentivized Putin to keep going forward instead of putting the pressure on Putin to force him to the peace table.
Putting pressure on Putin to force him to the peace table. I mean, how many times have we heard that? How many times we showed you from all over Europe, from the United States, from elite in the U.S. These guys still are holding to that fiction that if you just pressure Russia a little bit more, he's going to buckle. I mean, come on, man. Seriously, to all of the folks who hold that position, a little historical concept is probably in order here. Just a wee bit of understanding of what is, even in American history, an understanding of things that have happened. You have the Russian side here who have shown that they have an enormous capacity to suffer for causes they believe in. We won World War II. We were part of the coalition that won World War II, along with the Soviet Union, France, France, Britain, United States, and the big four that were at the Yalta Conference, and the Soviet Union, the USSR. So we were allies at that point here. But how many casualties did the United States suffer? Total casualties or deaths rather, in the World War II, in the Pacific theater and in the European theater. According to the monument on the National Capitol, it's 400,000. We lost 400,000 total dead. That was a combination of accidents, illness, and also the direct killed in action. I think the killed in action were somewhere around 250,000. Which in raw numbers is obviously quite high. We had, I want to say it was about 12 million men under arms at the height of World War II, when we had the most of that was everywhere in both the United States and both other theaters. So it was quite a large number of soldiers, and that's a relatively tame number of casualties in comparison to what the USSR suffered, what the Russians suffered, and their allies. The Russians alone, whatever the allies is, that's separate. But the Russians alone suffered, and it depends on which historian you want to talk to, anywhere from 20 million to 40 million people died total during World War II on the Russian side. An astronomical number. By means of comparison, there was well over 1 million Russians who died in the Battle of Stalingrad alone. And we're talking about maybe a period of about 4 months. We suffered a total of 400,000 dead in both theaters of war throughout all the years of the war. Russia lost that many fighting for one burned out city. When they have decided that's something they're willing to do, that that's something they want, there is nothing they won't sacrifice for it. And in those people who think that, they always say this, the Russian economy is wobbling already. It's not clear how much longer they can go. See, they're trying to foist an American mentality onto the Russians and saying, well, if our economy started to wobble, we would get upset, we would start protesting, etc. So if the Russian economy, which has genuinely high inflation, if that keeps going, eventually the people will also get mad. They'll say, well, this war's dumb, stop doing it and stop spending our money. Yeah, so let's just hold out a little bit longer. Russians aren't Americans. They have an enormous capacity. I'm talking through centuries, not just World War II, but for centuries to really suffer. That's almost part of the Russian mentality, is that they suffer. And so they are much more bent to endure long things if they think it's important enough. Even in World War I, where they ended up revolting, and the people did turn, they had the Russian Revolution. That only came after 5 million casualties on the Russian side. That's how much the suffering has to be before there's even possibility of them turning. And of course, there was a whole bunch of other things involved with the Russian Revolution, but that was one of the big components, was the losses suffered at the war. If you think that you're going to have a similar situation going now, and that if enough suffering the Russians can keep with enough pressure, just make it uncomfortable enough for Vladimir Putin, and he'll buckle. You just don't know anything about the Russian people. And that's important. It doesn't matter if you like them, you can hate them, but you also have to recognize this reality. And if you think that by continuing the war and continuing letting all these Ukrainian people go and fight this war and dying every day, and it's at some point they'll act like you think you would under similar circumstances, all you're doing is condemning all of these people to a certain death and failure on the battlefield. Because Russia has clearly indicated that this is not like the U.S. experience in Vietnam, to where we got tired of fighting that war, and after about a decade, we said, all right, whatever, let's just finish this, had protests, etc. This isn't like that. This is on their front doorstep. This is the NATO alliance and 50 nations, which we brag about all the time, that are allied against Russia on their front door. This is an existential fight for them, and there's no price that they won't be willing to pay, at least anything that's even in the conceptual framework right now. So that's the first thing you need to understand. This idea that you can pressure Putin is just devoid from any kind of understanding of who the opponent is. You know, Sun Tzu famously said that to know yourself and to know your enemy, you need not fear the results of any battle. But if you don't know your enemy and know yourself, then for every battle you win, you may lose. But if you don't know either yourself or your enemy, I'm going to paraphrase here, but you better run like hell, because you're going to lose nearly every time. And that's the path we're on. It's not even that we know ourselves and don't know the Russians. That alone makes it almost very unlikely that you're going to succeed. But if you don't even understand yourself or your enemy, then you've got almost no chance. And we see that play out throughout human history, across the board, thousands of years of human history. And it's now starting to play out here. So let me help you out a little bit, those of you who may not understand where the Russians really are, so you can kind of get in your idea, where is, or are there any leverage points that we have, or is maybe a different course of action on our side the most rational, logical, and has the best chance of success, even from our perspective? And there is one that I'll get to at the end. But let's look at, first of all, is what Lavrov said. He was interviewed by CBS News, an American outlet, over the weekend, and he talked about the situations from a positive perspective of trying to reach a negotiated settlement with Trump.
There are several signs that we are moving in the right direction. First of all, because President Trump is probably the only leader on earth who recognized the need to address the root causes of this situation, when he said that it was a huge mistake to pull Ukraine into NATO, and this was a mistake by Biden administration, and he wants to rectify this.
So he's talking about this root causes. I mentioned that at the outset. You saw that declaration from the Russian media earlier today about this ceasefire coming up, and that they want to talk without conditions, but only if we look at the root causes. Now, here, Sergei Lavrov, again, in this interview said, we have to get to the root causes of this. Well, what are those root causes? Because Putin has been saying for quite a long time what those are. And I'm going to show you here in a number of clips from him from the beginning of this war, like the literal first day, all the way through to the recent day. And you're going to see that they almost never change. There's a couple of pieces in between. In particular, you're going to see that keep popping up over and over, the very consistent position that the Russians have. And if you don't understand that, then you don't even have a chance to affect anything here on the ground. So let's take a look at those. First of all, this is just a couple of days ago when the Russian Chief of General Staff, Gerasimov, presented to Putin a statement saying, hey, we have finally taken the last settlement back from Ukraine in the Kursk area after this August of last year, where they ended up taking thousands or hundreds of square kilometers of Russian territory. It has now been taken out. And in response to that, Putin addressed the war going forward.
The Kiev regime's adventure has completely failed, and the huge losses suffered by the enemy, including among the most combat-ready, prepared, and equipped, including the Western samples of the Navy, the assault units of the Special Forces, will certainly affect the entire line of combat. The complete defeat of the enemy in the Kursk border creates conditions for further successful actions of our troops and on other important sections of the front, and brings the defeat of the neo-Nazi regime closer.
Okay, that last part there is absolutely critical to understand. because he said that this defeat of the Kursk, they didn't just drive Ukraine out of their territory and say, yay, we succeeded. But he said, which now sets the conditions all along other parts of the front line to meet our bigger objective, which he said was the complete defeat of the Kiev regime, as he called it. That's not saying, hey, we're looking to just end the war here. We're looking to get rid of and militarily defeat the regime. That doesn't sound like they're getting ready for an end of war negotiation somewhere along the current front lines. I mean, he's point blank said to set the conditions to further advance our efforts forward, and with the objective to end the regime of what they call the denazification. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it should, because I'm going to show you just a small clip of the announcement that Putin made on the night the war started in February 2022.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции. Ее цель – защита людей, которые на протяжении 8 лет подвергаются издевательствам, геноциду со стороны киевского режима. И для этого мы будем стремиться к демилитаризации и денацификации Украины, а также преданию суду тех, кто совершил многочисленные кровавые преступления против мирных жителей, в том числе и граждан Российской Федерации.
So you see again, that Kiev regime, he used that phrase then, demilitarize and denazify. Now, we know from publicly available records, and I saw this morning on the Institute for the Study of War, the offer that Russia made in Istanbul in April 2022 also required for a denazification and a demilitarization. At that time, they said a total of 85,000 total active forces throughout all of Ukraine. That's the demilitarization part. They said, if you're willing to go down to that, we'll end the war here and eventually withdraw our troops and go back to Russia. And the denazify means, in their terminology, that many of the people who were responsible for the threat to Russia, who led the government, would have to be removed one way or the other. And then he said, then that's when they said, and then after that, they would withdraw. Obviously, those were harsh terms that Ukraine didn't want, and it was summarily rejected by Zelensky himself and Boris Johnson and nearly everybody else in the West at the time. They said, yeah, sure, don't do that. Just keep on fighting. That's the ticket right there. Well, Russia didn't change its mind there. And then we fast forward after the 2023 Ukrainian offensive, which utterly broke its teeth, and then the beginning where Russia then started going back on the offensive in 2024, and Putin made another comment, this time on June 14th.
The essence of our proposal is not some kind of temporary truce or suspension of fire, as, for example, the West wants. This is not about freezing the conflict, but about its final completion. And I will say again, as soon as Kiev agrees to a similar course of events proposed today, agrees to the complete withdrawal of its troops from the DPR and LPR in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions, and really begins this process, we are ready to begin negotiations without delaying them. I repeat, this is our principled position. Neutral, non-aligned, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its demilitarization and denazification.
Yeah, there's that phrase again, demilitarization and denazification. That was last summer. And then now here you hear Lavrov continue to say it. Peskov specifically said, almost verbatim, that less than a week ago, when he said, if the Ukraine side will lay down their arms and withdraw from all of those 4 territories, then we'll have the ceasefire and all the fighting will come to an end and we can negotiate the final terms of it. So you see a very consistent statement. You see from Russia's comments from the beginning all the way through to Lavrov's yesterday. They're concerned about the Russian-speaking people, the ethnic Russians in these areas, and they said, we'll do whatever it takes to protect them. The only reason that Russia even now will agree to only taking the administrative borders of those 4 regions along with Crimea is because concurrent with that, there's also the requirement for what they call denazification and demilitarization. They will agree to that part if Ukraine withdraws from all their troops, as long as they also demilitarize on the other side. They are still holding to somewhere around this 85,000 number troop, which is about a 10th of what they have all in their forces right now. So most of them would have to literally demobilize and just quit being in the military. And all of these people that are throughout the government that were responsible for foisting and then continuing this war from the Russian perspective will have to go. They'll have to, I don't know, leave government. They'll have to be voted out, something to that effect. Obviously, those are incredibly intrusive statements and conditions. They're terrible. There's no better way to put it. That's just awful from the Ukrainian point of view. But this is what we keep going back to over and over and over. As ugly and bad as those are now, if you accept those terms and agree to all of those intrusive situations, no other Ukrainian will die. And those lines can stay on the June 14 line that Putin laid out a second ago there. But if you don't agree to all of that, and Trump's saying he wants a deal, he just wants the war to stop, but he's got to understand that Russia's not thinking just want to stop. They're thinking we want the original conditions and objectives we set in February of 2022 will all be accomplished one way or the other. If they can get it this way, they're willing to talk. That's the reason why Lavrov keeps coming on American television. Why Putin keeps saying these comments over and over about how he's willing to do that. Why he said again today, yes, we're willing to have a no holds barred, no preconditions necessary, direct contact with the Ukrainian leadership. They're still saying that because if they can get those objectives by negotiations, then they'll take it. But if they can't, then we had this from Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov just a couple of days ago about what they're planning next.
In accordance with your instructions, the creation of a security zone in the border areas of the Sumy region of Ukraine continues. 4 settlements have been liberated. The total area of the controlled territory is more than 90 square kilometers. In addition, in the Belgorod region, units of the Saver Group have completed the destruction of Ukrainian sabotage groups in the area of the settlement of Popovka.
You may recall, and if you haven't seen it, you can check on our homepage there, and you can see that we interviewed the deputy UN ambassador for Russia from New York a couple of days ago. And I specifically asked him there, if you don't get these situations that you want diplomatically through negotiations, will you continue to fight? Yeah, that's there. You can look for that thumbnail. I strongly encourage you to watch that whole show if you haven't. And he said, well, that's what we are doing. We have not stopped fighting. We have not stopped our attacks. We're simply continuing on militarily with the objective of winning the war. That's just where they're physically doing right now. And you heard Gerasimov saying there, we're already into the Sumy area. We so far have 90 square kilometers. Those combat operations are continuing. He talked about the Belgorod area where they pushed the Ukraine side out of that. The implication being they're not going to stop there. We know in the Kupiansk area on the northern part of the Eastern Front, in the Pokrovsk area in the center part of the Eastern Front, and in the Zaporizhia area in the southern part of the Eastern Front. All of those are hot and continuing to move on. And you have Trump saying that if he doesn't get a deal, and it was reported on one of the Ukrainian Telegram channels over the weekend, that has a good track record of being right, claimed that Trump gave basically both sides a 10-day ultimatum. Y'all either figure out a way to at least come to a full ceasefire within 10 days or I'm done. I'm walking. Well, of course, if there's any truth to that, and that certainly seems plausible, given the other things that Trump has openly said. I mean, he said about a week ago that, yeah, I'm either going to find some kind of a deal in the next few days or I'm going to walk. And Rubio has said that. I think he reiterated that again over the weekend as well. So everything indicates that we're about ready to walk. And I mean, we got to be honest. If you're a Russia side, why would you agree to anything in the near term if you think that Trump is about to walk? So that's just the truth of it. Now, I guess there is some reason because Russia also says, hey, we want a relationship with the U.S. going forward because we're going to have to. When you have 2 nuclear superpowers, you've got to figure out a way to normalize relations. So Russia does have some incentive to keep working with America. And that's the reason why I think you're seeing it right now. They would prefer to end this war through negotiations and then have some kind of good relation with the U.S. going forward because, I mean, you're talking this just indefinitely. There's going to be relations between, and why have bad ones? Why go back to another Cold War, which is bad for everybody, if there's a possibility of having at least decent, maybe you don't even go so far as to say normalize, but at least decent kind of relations between the nuclear superpowers going forward. That's something that benefits the planet, not even just the United States or just Russia. So there's an interest in that, but that interest stops at their national security interests. just like it should for every country. They should say, hey, we're going to do whatever it takes for our own side here, and then we'll, look for the benefit of others elsewhere, friends and allies, etc. That's what should be going on. That's what should be driving our foreign policy right now. And it looks like there's a good chance that is what Trump is doing. And that's the reason why the only thing that makes sense is to either, golly, maybe rephrase that. I was going to say that the one thing that might make some sense is to come to a negotiated settlement with the Russian side, but then he has to get the Ukraine side to agree to that. And those terms I just laid out to you a second ago, that's not something that I think any Ukrainian politician can live by. There's a lot of evidence that even within the Ukraine side, that there's a lot of pressure from a lot of these ultra-nationalist group that have claimed. I think I saw something on Ukrainian television over the weekend that were one of the leaders of one of these nationalist groups said that there's no way that we'll agree to anything with the Russian side. And if the current leadership does, they'll regret it, implying potential for coup or something of that nature. We don't know what's going to happen with that, but there is evidence that there's pressure on Zelensky, meaning that there's virtually no way that he's going to agree to those draconian measures, meaning the only thing left is for Russia to militarily take it. So if that be the case, unlike what Adam Smith thinks, unlike what Ivo Daalder thinks, there is no pressure just fundamentally that you can put on Putin that's going to make him relent when he has been saying from day one, actually from 2015 forward, actually from 2008 forward, that no NATO in Ukraine, and we're not going to stop until our ethnic citizens are taken care of inside of Ukraine. That you're suddenly going to put pressure on that he's going to go back on that. That he's going to stop short of the things when he has the power to seize them militarily. It's just irrational as you can get, and just really an embarrassment that passes for elite thinking in the West right now. Totally detached from reality. These aren't hard things I'm telling you right now. These are just things that are evident on the ground and have been demonstrated over now into the 4th year of a war. And you keep on ignoring those to your peril. And we'll have to wait and see how it's going to work out here. But that's just that's kind of where we are right now. And, we'll see what happens on this May 9th situation here. And by the way, if there was this 10-day deadline given, that would be 10 days from the time it was reported, would be a couple of days before the 9th of May celebration. And can you even imagine any kind of a possibility where right before that big thing that Putin is putting all of his efforts into, where he's going to have leaders from all over the world in, they're going to celebrate the 80th victory of World War II. They're going to be celebrating again this whole victory with in the Kursk area. They're going to be, apparently there's even going to be some North Korean soldiers there, where, by the way, Putin for the first time openly acknowledged that they were there and that they were helped in the Kursk reclamation process, etc. That right before all that he's going to go, okay, you know what? But I'm willing to end the war here on the current line of contact and stop short of all these things I've been telling you since 2022 we're going to get done. I mean, even if there was hypothetically an interest in his in doing that, he would certainly not do it by this deadline date. And then we keep talking about this. That puts Trump in a really uncomfortable position. What are you going to do when that deadline comes, or when there's even that, because that's been reported. He hadn't said that publicly, but he did say publicly a week ago that within a week or so that he is ready to walk if he doesn't get what he wants. And if he doesn't, and time keeps passing and he doesn't get it, then people are going to say, hey, are you walking or not? And if he doesn't, if he keeps on supporting Ukraine anyway, that will make it look like Zelensky compelled Trump. It's going to look like Zelensky's all this reticent, all this resistance he's been having, not signing these mineral deals, embarrassing Trump in the White House itself, in the Oval Office, listening to all he's saying and then making statements against him, his vice president, his senior negotiator. All those things will have succeeded. And of course, Europe will just be ecstatic about that. I don't think that's something that Trump wants. I don't think that's a route he wants to go down, which implies that he'll probably say, I'm just going to do what I said and I'm going to walk here. And all the ramifications that come along with that. So there is no good thing coming from the Ukraine side anytime in the near future. And I think that Trump is the only one that can help usher the end of this insanity in closer. And unfortunately, because of all the malfeasance and the just disastrous policies of the previous administration and all of Europe and Zelensky, and he bears an enormous amount because he ultimately is the decider for what his country does. writ large, those guys are all responsible for bringing us to this ugly point right now. We need to be crystal clear on that. Whatever you want to say about Trump, whatever Adam Smith wants to say about what Trump's going to do, it's been because the horrific decisions by the senior military people, by the diplomats, by the heads of state, all this stuff in the first 3+ years of this war, all that leads to this ugly dynamic that Trump has inherited right here. And hopefully he's going to walk away from this, because the absence of the United States and the stopping of our support or whatever will probably bring him mercifully quicker into this, as opposed to doing what apparently many in the Europe want, which is to just continue indefinitely until, I don't know, the Ukraine side is just ground to dust, which could literally take another year or possibly even longer if they got a lot of support there. But absent that, all that would do, by the way, is increase the cost of loss, because then you'd probably have hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians dead who are alive right now, to include the youngest generation that there is, down in the teenagers, the 18 to 19-year-olds, because that's what they would have to do. Even in that perverted view that many in the Europeans want, they would have to sacrifice yet another generation, and nobody gives any thought to that or what would come next, etc. So the most moral and kind thing Trump could do for the Ukrainian people is to walk. That's just where we are. Thank you very much for watching right now. We're going to have Colonel Doug McGregor on at 3 o'clock this afternoon. You're going to talk about some other really important aspects of this whole Russia war here. You're not going to want to miss that. Always a pleasure to have Doug McGregor on. We'll see you at 3 o'clock this afternoon on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.